Hey, so today we're going to get into some topics that would be visionary for what groups can be and should be, and get into some practicals about how we can do that, make it better. And like I said, there'll be a few people who will contribute from up front, but we really hope that there's holistic help from each other, and there'll be opportunities for that. And just so today I'll talk here for a little bit, and then we'll break and we'll come back, and Dylan Neely will talk a little bit about creating a legacy, and then we'll have a two-part sessions on vulnerability and discussion, and Josiah will take an angle, and then Alyssa will come in and she'll have an angle, and then we will have lunch, and then we'll come back and do some mutual learning, and man, I really want to encourage you to come ready with some thoughts to share with one another, and really I hope that we learn from each other. You could huddle up with people that are in your kind of group network or your church or your coaching circle, or it'd be great to get in a group with people from other churches and learn from each other. However you want to do it, it'd be great, but I do hope that we learn for each other. And thank you so much for, when you registered, I think everyone put down a challenge, and we took note of that. I took note of that, and there's 5 or 6 major groupings. We're going to address some of those major groupings again today. But I do a podcast. It's a leadership podcast for small groups that I've hit pause on for May and June. I'll get back to it in July, but I'm just going to start addressing every single challenge that you mentioned, and just take each week to give a few thoughts on that. I didn't tell these guys, but maybe later on we can flash up how they can connect to that podcast. Is that cool? Awesome. Thanks. How's that for a little self-promotion? I'm doing it for the children. It's okay. So my family likes puzzles. Anyone here like puzzles? Anybody? We go camping and we do puzzles, and so, we try to do as many as we can, and so much so that we get them from thrift stores sometimes. My wife and I both like thrift stores for different reasons. One of us likes them because you can find some really cool finds there, and you're really cool and artistic, and one of us is really cheap. I'll let you figure out who's who. But I was at a thrift store, and I saw a puzzle, but it was in a big bag, like a freezer bag. All these pieces, and if you've ever done a puzzle before and the pieces are just in a bag and you don't have the box, like the picture on it, that's kind of a cruel joke. Like if you were to give someone a puzzle, I'm like, why in the world? This is a joke. This is mean to give someone a big jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box. I think that's a pretty good analogy for how a lot of people think about their life and the world. The world and life is like this big jigsaw puzzle. There's all these different pieces. It all feels random. And how in the world does this all fit together? Who knows, right? Except that God has given us the picture on the box. God has given us the point of humanity. God has given us the point of what this looks like. And here's the big picture of the Bible. Here's the big picture of human history. And that is God is after a family. He's after a congregation, a people, a flock, a body, a bride, you name it, of every tribe, in every tongue. And here's what's going to happen. He's going to get it. He's going to get it. He is going to have this family. And this is the picture on the box. And this is where all of humanity is going toward. This was God's design from the very beginning. He longed to be with us. He longed to walk with us in the cool of the day. Sin fractured all of that, took this beautiful picture of what he wanted, and it fractured it into 1,000, 1,000,000, a gazillion, a badillion pieces. And there is no picture, but he sent his son. And He's given us His word. And He's shown us exactly what He wants to do. And this is a plan that the gates of hell will not prevail against. This is the wisdom of God put on display according to Ephesians 3:10, that He would put on, the wisdom of God would be put on display through the church. And this is His eternal purpose, right? You know what that means? That means He's been thinking about it for a long, long time. And it's going to last a real long, long time. 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, Microsoft won't exist, Apple won't exist, Starbucks won't exist, Chick-fil-A may exist. America won't exist, at least as we know it. Dictators, they come and go. Rulers, they come and go. I mean, where's the Roman Empire? Where's the Assyrian Empire? Where's the Hittite Empire? They're all gone. But one thing will be here in 500, 1,000 years, if Jesus hasn't come back, and that is His church. His church will be here. God's plan is through the church that He'll put His wisdom on display. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we take what we've been given and we give it to other people, and that's what the church did. And if you read through Acts, by the way, my notes are all over the place, and for those who speak, you know that's not a good sign, but trust me, everything's okay. So in Acts 1:15, 120 people, Acts 2:41, 3,000 people, Acts 2:47, daily additions, that's 365 a year plus. Acts 4:4, 5,000 men were added, so another 15, 20,000 people. In Acts 5:14, there's a multitude, which means it's basically a Greek word for we couldn't count. In Acts 5:28, it says that they filled Jerusalem with the teaching of Jesus. So now you may be talking like 100,000. Jerusalem at the time was maybe about 250,000, so maybe 100,000 people. In Acts 6:1, the number of disciples, that's an important word, we'll come back to that in a little bit, multiplied rapidly. Had a little hiccup at the end of the chapter, Acts 6:7. They're increasing rapidly. They're multiplying rapidly. Now they're increasing rapidly. And in Acts 21:20, tens of thousands and thousands of people were in the church. Well, how did they meet? How did they organize? Well, they organized in two main ways. They organized in, and I think we have this they organized in the temple courts, and they organized house to house. Temple courts, by the way, plural. It wasn't just one court, multiple courts. And if you know about the temple and the courts, I mean, you could fit thousands and thousands of people in these courts. And then the church would also meet in homes. So these are the major components of the church, all throughout history, all throughout the 2,000-year history of the church, and it's the importance of one or the other has gone this way or that way. The temple courts, big, large gathering, corporate worship, teaching, and all its different ways. And, you know, there's multiple courts, multiple services, multiple locations, and guitars and organs and, you know, whatever, LED walls and microphones and online service, whatever. And then you've got homes. And for whatever reason, we tend to want to like talk about like which one is better. Is it better to do this over here? Is it better to do this over here? When all throughout history, it's a combination of both, and cultural reasons will cause us to push the dial this way, push the dial this way. I'm going to make an argument today. One of the things I want to talk about is how in the past, 20, 30, 40 years, we have overemphasized for good reasons and some bad the temple courts, and we're moving into a season, and have been for some time, but it's accelerating. Why house to house is so important for really the three purposes of the church. The purpose of the church is he's made so clear, and we're supposed to do three main things that get summarized all throughout they're mentioned all throughout the Bible. They're summarized in the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. So Great Commandment, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then the other one is just like it. It's very similar. It's to love each other, love your neighbor. So you got to love God, you got to love your neighbor. Okay, your neighbor, who's my neighbor? People that share your worldview and people who don't share your worldview. So you're talking about people who are insiders as well as outsiders. And so many churches have tried to organize this in many different ways, and we have our language and you have your language, but it's basically this kind of up, in, and out approach. So you've got this, we got to love God, there's spiritual formation, there's worship, there's discipleship, and then there's this in component, this insider component, community, family, cohesion, and then there's this out component, mission, serving, and being inclusive, and getting out there and making a difference. And so at Jubilee, you guys, at your church, you probably have your own statement, but the way we summarize these three things is we want to help people know God. We want this up component happening. We want people to find family. We want this in thing happening, and we want to help people make a difference, the out thing. So we want to be spiritual formation, worship, all that, community, yes, mission, absolutely. So, and then Great Commission says the same thing, but kind of says it backwards. I want you to go out in the world and make disciples, go out, baptizing them, bring them in, teach them, help them to teach them to obey everything I've commanded them, the spiritual formation. So love God, love one another, love the world. That's what we're supposed to do. However you say it, and you may expand upon that, and that's fine, but that's basically what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to love God, love one another, love the world. And what I want to do is I want to talk about how small groups play a role in those two things. In fact, I would say this has always been true. Without small groups of people gathering together, we cannot fulfill the purpose of the church in any generation. But I want to talk a little bit about why I see some things happening that make what you do very, very important. Again, this isn't multiple choice, by the way. Love God, love people in your church, love people who are outside the church. It's not multiple choice. Some of us love God and want to do it all by ourselves. It doesn't work that way. How can you say you love God when you can't stand your brother or your sister? Doesn't work. And he's called, if you love me, you'll obey me, you'll do what I say, and then if I've got a lost, here's a lost sheep, here's a lost coin, here's a lost son, I've got lost things all over the place. How could you not share my heart in reclaiming these lost things all throughout the world? People who are distant from me. So it's all combined, so just get that out there. So we do these things in temple courts and house to house, and again, I want to talk about how these things are essential. So in this up portion, like how do small groups, why are they essential in us really like loving God with all that we are? I'll say it this way. So Jesus said in John 14:15, he says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Now, we're grace people, and that doesn't seem very gracious. And I think it's the difference between, like if I was to ask you, if I was to ask people in your church, if I was to ask the average person, are you a Christian? And then if I was to ask them this question, are you a disciple? Those are two different things. Now, biblically, they're not two different things. So let me get that really clear. But like the way we've defined what a Christian, Christian is like the brand. Christian is like, kind of like, this is my team. But disciple is something different. It's more narrow. It's more specific. It's more kind of hard to get away from, from are you a disciple? Like, are you following Jesus? Like, are you doing what he says to do? Not something that you believe, so it's not a statement of faith. It's not a genre of music. It's like, are you doing something? Are you obeying him? Are you following him? Are you going after him? A disciple, learner, pupil, apprentice, follower. A disciple is, I've got to, so if you're a disciple of someone, a disciple is, I've got a decision to make. What do you think I should do? And what's scary about that? Because she's like, what's scary about that? You're just getting some advice. Everybody should get advice. Here's what's scary. So you say to this person that you're following, hey, I've got this decision to make. I want to do something. What do you think I should do? But I just want you to know, as your disciple, the answer is yes. So now what should I do? That's a lot different than being a Christian. It's a lot narrower in the range of outcomes and how you spend your money, how you parent, how you engage your neighbors, schedule, time, talents. What do you think about racism, dating, sex, marriage, wealth, possessions? You can hide behind Christian because of how it's being redefined in and outside of the church, but it's hard to escape being a disciple. And in our churches, we're not trying to gather Christians, we're trying to multiply disciples. And if discipleship is our goal, community is essential. You can't even try to do this on your own. To be generally Christian, you can do that on your own. I mean, podcast and music and, Christian t-shirts and Christian stuff. But to be a disciple, at the very least, you need people around you to tell you that you're not crazy. Yeah, you're not crazy for giving away that money. I just need to know, am I crazy for, no, you're not crazy. Because you're not crazy for choosing the kingdom payoff over the career payoff. You're not crazy by living by the biblical ethic for sex. You're not crazy by being the only one in your family doesn't validate everything in a political party does not stand for. I said that as fast as I possibly could. And plausible deniability. I didn't say that. No eye contact. And so we have a lot of Christians in our churches. But do we have disciples? It's a different question. And that's the whole thing on itself, but I'm going to move on a little bit. So how does this work in small groups? Okay, practically. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Underline this in your Bible, highlight it on your phone. Teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom. That's important. Let's use wisdom in teaching and admonishing one another. Did you notice that? By the way, there are 58 one another's in the Bible. You can't do that in a crowd very well. You've got to do it in community. The smaller, the better. 10 is better than 12. 8 is better than 10. 6 is better than 8. Smaller, the better. Teaching and admonishing one another. Admonishing without teaching equals legalism and insecurity. Not our biggest problem in the church. Here's our biggest problem. Teaching without admonishing equals pride and apathy. We've got a lot of information out there, not a lot of transformation. So we got to be people who teach each other and then admonish them with all wisdom. That's not how you play your marriage. It's not how you think about this. It's not how you treat this person. It's not how you do this. It's not how you organize your schedule. Question number 1, just to not skip over and make any assumptions. Is there someone in your life who can tell you no on the big decisions? If they can't, you're not in the kind of community that God wants you to be a part of. Imagine teaching your children, but never admonishing them. What are you saying, Bryan? I'm like a child? Actually, the Bible is saying it, you're worse. You're like a sheep. I'll leave it on that high note. We just need each other to ever even have a chance of becoming conformed in the image of Christ. I mean, at least admit that you've got a little bit of distance between you and Jesus. You might have a little bit of work to do in how you think and how you act and how you behave and how you feel and I know I do. That's what my wife tells me anyway. So So we need each other to love God with all of our heart and with all of our mind and all of our strength and all that we are and all that we have, to worship him, to consider him weighty in our lives and to grow into the full stature of him and to have other people ministering to each other in 100 different ways and speaking the truth in love and being, it takes people, small groups. What you do, small group leader, is critical for us fulfilling the purpose of loving God with all that we are. We cannot do it alone. We can't even understand the Bible alone. It's not like I have the mind of Christ. The Bible says that we have the mind of Christ. This is something that we need each other. We need each other's experiences. Secondly, it's obvious we need it to do the in thing. I hope that's obvious. Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Now, that's not new. This is the end of his life. And he's like, hey, I'm going to gather you together. I'm going to share some things, and I'm getting ready to go. And they still didn't believe him, but he's like, ministry's over, miracles are over. He's like, hey, I just want to give you this new command. I want you to love each other. They're like, well, that's not new. Like, you've been saying this all the time. You've been telling us to love each other all the time. Well, here's the new part. Just as I have loved you. That's the new part. Nathaniel, you know how I love you. You remember when I first met you? Remember what you were like? Remember what you said? Oh gosh, don't mention this, Jesus. Yeah, you said, can anything good come from Nazareth? I mean, you dissed me, you dissed my whole family, you dissed my whole town, my whole city. But you know how I accepted you and loved you and made you a part? Matthew, everybody hated you. You're a tax collector, you were a traitor. I had to keep Peter from knocking your head off. Remember how I loved you? Or remember when I fed the 5,000 and I did that whole vampire sermon, like drink blood and eat flesh? And then everybody that I fed, literally I had them literally, feeding them literally out of the palm of my hand. And then they all left. And you wanted to leave too, didn't you? But I didn't hold that against you. But I loved you. I want you to love each other that way. And then he just kind of like icing on the cake. He said, okay, let me do something here. So in John 13:3, this verse blew me away a few months ago. It says in John 13:3 that Jesus knew. Okay, this is the final scene of his life. What did he know? Well, he knew this. He knew that Judas was going to betray him. He knew Peter was going to deny him. This guy who puffed out his chest and said, I'll never do that. And then a middle school girl kind of had him shaking in his boots. So you had the betrayer, and then you had the denier, and then you had these other 10 who just left him as well. So he knew that. But then it says he knew that the Father had put all power and authority in his hands. I mean, Jesus, he could have gone to the lake every weekend. He could have gone to the lake. He could have gone to Hawaii. He could have taken the job. He could have done anything because he knew that he had all power and all authority. And to these group of men who would flat out betray him, reject him, and abandon him, with all of that knowledge, he got on his knees, he took off his outer garment, and he washed their feet. This new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. Whew. And then, here's that word again. Verse 35, he's not done. By this, all people will know that you are my what? Yeah. So are you a Christian or are you a disciple? Can't love a crowd. In fact, turn to the person that's not your spouse and tell them you love them. It's kind of weird, isn't it? All right, it's enough. It's enough. Maybe my theory didn't work. Okay. But here's the thing. I mean, this is a problem with like the isolation that we're experiencing in our world. That, you know, when there's distance, you begin to doubt a person's love for you. I mean, all the weird stuff in 2021, the conspiracy theory. I mean, it's just like what happens when there's distance. You just begin to wonder. So so we begin to know each other through like online research. Oh, so we hear one word, and then I know who you are because of that one word. And there's this relational fracture. It's happening in our culture. In January of 2009, Burger King ran this ad campaign where they said if you would unfriend 10 of your Facebook friends, they would give you a coupon for a free Whopper. So the way it was supposed to work is that Burger King would send them a notification that they had been unfriended by a delicious Whopper. So that was their strategy. Which was supposed to make you sound like, wow, this burger is really something. Well, the New York Times reported that the stunt worked too well, and within the first week, thousands and millions of friends were terminated. And Burger King was on the hook for 23,000 Whoppers, and they had to discontinue the promotion before they went out of business. That was for a Whopper. One friend. 10 friends. Whopper. 10 friends. It's got to be a Whopper. Friendship is dwindling in our culture. In the last 20 years, pretty much every social activity is on decline. Full service restaurant. I mean, this is before COVID. These stats are a little old, but it's an overall trend. Going to full service restaurants down 25%. However, drive-through restaurants is up 100%. People would rather eat their meal in their lap than around a table. People prefer convenience. I mean, of course, this is all like way over, with all the food now comes to your door. You don't even have to get out. In fact, I was eating, I had a lunch with a friend a couple days ago, and we went to the counter, and we went to the counter, and there's this big computer where we just did it right. We don't have to talk to the person anymore. Like, we don't have to talk to the person and tell them what we want. We just do it right here. We're lonely and depressed. According to the CDC, antidepressant use is at 400%. More than 10% of all kids of the age of 12 are currently prescribed antidepressant medication. Places where communities experience the least, residents distrust their neighbor, volunteer less, vote less, socialize less, children get poor grades, poor health, teenage pregnancy is higher, there are higher dropout rates among high school students, crime is higher, suicide is higher, premature death is higher. And what social scientists have discovered is that the correlation between friendships and positive child development is about as perfect of correlation that you'll find in data analysis of this sort. Ecclesiastes says, 2 are better than 1, but because they have a good reward for their toil. But if one falls, woe to the person who doesn't have someone to pick him up. A few years ago, researchers studied at 34 students at the University of Virginia. They took them to the base of a mountain, and they gave them a weighted backpack. They were then asked to estimate the steepness of the hill. Some participants stood next to friends during exercise while others were alone. The students who stood with friends gave lower estimates of the steepness of the hill, and the longer the friends had known each other, the less steep the hill appeared. I could just go on. Just on and on. I'll give you some homework. Study loneliness. Google it. 50% of Americans claim to be alone. In England, a few years back, Theresa May introduced a new cabinet, whatever the England thing is called. This is where my disorganized notes is not paying off. But believe me when I tell you, I'll say it's a cabinet member. Is it a cabinet member? Oh, thank goodness. It is a cabinet member. So what do you call these people, Ben? Like they're called a cabinet, like the secretary of something, or? So they have a loneliness secretary now. That's responsible for the loneliness problem. Because here's the Cigna report, SIGNA. Google that. The health. Loneliness is more damaging to your physical health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness is more damaging to your health than obesity. It is better, therefore, that you gather with your friends and eat donuts than exercising alone. I finally have research to back that up. Okay, so that's out and in. Sorry, that's up and in. Okay, out. Mission. This is where the trends we need to pay attention here, because this has to do with how we organize. Do we emphasize Sunday, or do we emphasize the midweek? And it's always going to be both. But there's a couple shifts happening in our culture. One is toward individualism. The best is for me. So I already told you 9 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever that study was, we want a Whopper more than 10 friends. Arlie Hochschild, she's a sociologist. She wrote a book called The Outsourced Self. Anybody read that? Oh, okay. The subtitle is What Happens When We Pay Others to Live Our Lives For Us. So she makes the point that because we are so busy, because we are socially disconnected, because families are weaker than they used to be, because social groups are weaker than they used to be, people move to follow their individual dreams 11.7 times on average. Get up and move, got a better job, we just move, we're mobile. Therefore, we live in communities much, much thinner than, say, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, people lived where they grew up, so they are surrounded by people who loved them, knew them, supported them, which of course is how most people in most cultures of history have lived. And she makes the point that we have sacrificed community for productivity. And what was once a part of private life, love, friendships, parenting, conversation, is being transformed into package expertise to be sold back to confused, hurried Americans. She points out that it used to be in your community helped you find a spouse, but now there are dating services that teach you to be the CEO of your love life. Wedding planners who help you create your personal narrative, and there is even a growing field called namologists who help you name your child. There is wantologists who help you name your personal goals, and there are even professional mourners hired to grieve at your funeral or scatter your ashes in the ocean of your choice. She's not making fun of it, and I'm not making fun of it. Well, maybe a little. But her point, my point, is that there's never been a society, and okay, we're talking about mission now, Jesus said, go in all the world, make disciples, send them out. People are hungry. You feed them, you do that. Okay, so we're talking about mission. Her point is that we have never been in a society in history where people are more likely to come to church and say, I pay the professionals to do it. Don't ask me to work with the poor. Now, my church better be involved in the poor because that's what I'm paying for. But don't ask me to care. Don't ask me to love. Don't ask me to understand theology so I can communicate to others. Don't ask me to have the time, the money, the energy. But Jesus says, I am asking you. I have asked you. I have called you. I have appointed you. I have anointed you to walk in good deeds. Ephesians 2:10. You were called, sent, appointed, anointed, predestined to walk in good deeds, not just with your gift, but your personality, your race, your gender, your experiences, good and bad. Everything about you is meant to minister to people he has called you. In fact, there are certain people that only you can minister to. There are certain demons only you can cast out. There are certain people only you can reach. Well, how are we going to minister in such a specific and intimate way? Small groups. Smaller the better. And we should want them to grow. I mean, it's not up to us, but we should want our groups to be healthy. We should want more people. We should be thinking missionally. We want lots of people to be in community, and we want to continually invite them in. And we don't get identity out of it. Remember John last night? It's really important. We make it about ourselves. We make success about us. We make failure about us. And here's what's going to happen. It's the quickest way to burn out in cynicism. You either stop trying or quit or act like you don't care. I don't really care if my group grows. I'm just kind of like, I'm just trying to do this. Come on. We want it to grow. We're just not responsible for growth. We water, we fertilize, we plant. God makes it grow. We're just servants. We got to be faithful to what he's called us to do. It's like with your kids. There's no parent in this room who does not want their kids to do well physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, educationally, if that's a word. But ultimately, you don't determine those things. The grace of God does. You just wait till they're 18. If they're only 3 right now. So we don't get attached to, our kids' success is not our identity, but we want them to grow. So same thing with our groups. So we need groups in order to do mission because of the increase of how the world is going in individualization. Smaller the better. More than 14 people begin to feel anonymous. More than 10 really, someone stops talking. And then typically the person who is the most outgoing with the least social IQ fills that space. Am I the only one who's experienced that? Or what you're saying, Bryan, you're it. Like, Bryan, that's you. That's why everybody's laughing. That's too bad because I got a microphone well, my time's up, but I'm going to keep going. Here's another thing, though. Here's something more recent. Here's another reason why small groups are key to mission. There are some drastic societal changes that are happening that got accelerated in 2020. And there's a growing hostility toward Christians. So the church, you could say, the Sunday morning, you could say is the front door. Man, we've got great music and comfortable buildings and did I mention great music and coffee and all that stuff, and you just come and it's big front open door. But imagine you had a neighbor that's a Jehovah's Witness, and they came to you and said, you got to come to my church, man. Like, we've got this great band and coffee, and we'll park your car for you, and there's like a slide for your kids, and like the communicator is so charismatic and amazing, and they just list off like 25 amazing benefits. And the whole time you're thinking, well, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. I don't care about that. I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness because what I think about a Jehovah's Witness. That's how people think about Christianity. Well, how are they ever going to make it? Well, you're going to have to come in through the side door of relationships. The Wormlingtons, Ben, who helped me out earlier with England stuff, they started, I think, attending our church like in August, maybe last year. Okay, and just come to find out, like they just started gathering people in their backyard. I think friends of yours from law school, Stephanie, is that right, or something like that? And through that relationship, inviting them over, small group, and then inviting them to service. And I think things like that are going to become more and more prevalent. Not to say that, let's just get rid of, we're getting rid of Sunday morning, or getting rid of buildings. I hope not, because we just bought one. And then we're just going to go house. No, that's not it. Don't be foolish. It's a tension that we're going to move. It just means that it's happening more and more because of how people think about Christians. I mean, the word evangelical is really not is a political term. It has anything to do with faith anymore. It's a political term. Evangelicals do this and they do that, and Christian is actually becoming that as well. It's becoming a political term. So again, in Temple Courts, house to house, come and see Temple Courts Sunday morning. Come, check it out. That's legitimate. It always has, always will be. House to house, go and tell. Bring people in through the side door. And we have to be those who are aware of the time. David said that after he served the purpose of God, after he served the purpose of God in his own generation, then he went to sleep, which means he died. So we have this, we do the timeless in a timely way. We live out what never changes in a culture that is always changing. And so we have to be those who bring the gospel to this generation. And there's some people who think the golden age of Christianity was the 1950s or the 1970s or the 1990s or whatever it is. And but you can't serve God in that generation. The only generation that we can serve God in is this one. And so we have to be moldable and flexible. So how do we reach them? Side door. Well, we reach them through pain. People come to Christ when they are in transition or under tension. C.S. Lewis, God whispers in our joy or something like that. And sorry. Pain is God's megaphone. That's the point. You know where I'm going with this. I'm trying to hurry up. So we need to stop trying to reach everybody in our communities. We need to focus on the people who are in pain. Leave happy pagans alone. Just the people who are in pain. They're in the Bible. There are 4 kinds of soil. There's the hard soil, the hard heart, the rocky soil, the conflicted heart, the thorny soil, the busy heart, and the good soil. And that's how those are the ones who their heart is soft. And God softens our heart through pain. Only 25% of the people out there are even open to the gospel. 75% of people are unreachable. By the way, some of those 75% claim to be Christian are in your church. I mean, for those who preach and you've got like that, it's hard heart. It's not changing. It's not going anywhere. But there are 25% out there that once they receive the word, the fruit is all over the place. Well, how do we know if people are in pain? Small groups, relationships. Church of 100, if you know 400 people, and there are 100 people that you know they're in pain collectively. So if 100 times 4, the 4 people that you know. Jesus told a parable, Luke 14, when one of those who reclined at the table heard these things, said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat the bread of the kingdom of God." It's a great thing. We want to invite people into the kingdom. It's a blessed thing. It's a happy thing. But he said to them, a man once gave a banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent out the servant to say to them who had been invited, "Come, for everything now is ready. You have read your verses. You got your questions all aligned. You've got your house in perfect order, and you've got the chairs out. You got food out. You even got your little index cards to know exactly what we're going to say when. Way more organized than mine. And you say, okay, everybody come, and then nobody shows up. Happens in our groups, happened to Jesus. Hope that encourages you. Even Jesus can't get past a hard heart. He can't get past the thorny heart or the rocky heart. Jesus can't do it. You won't either. They began to make excuses. The first one said to him, I bought a field. I must go and see it. I got a new house. I got a new place. The other one said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I got a new jet ski. I go check it out. Please excuse me. The other one said, I've married a wife, therefore I cannot come. So the servant came and reported these things to his master. And the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, go quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame, people in pain. It's not my job to prepare the soil. It's only my job to plant it in the best place possible. Let me leave you with this question. What would it look like? What would it look like for our churches to begin to train and help people to minister to people in pain? Someone had a job for 25 years and they got laid off, and now they're back, forced out in the workplace. A neighbor lost her spouse unexpectedly. A teenager around the corner had an overdose. They survived, but there's a lot of trauma going on. What would it look like to minister to people in pain? You just found out someone had cancer. Someone has a special needs child, foster care, adoption, divorce, 100 hurts and pains. The beginning point of evangelism is pain, and it's dependent upon relationships in small groups. And what we do as small group leaders is so important. The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. We cannot love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength without small groups. We can't love each other. We can't actually do mission. I just want to invite you to think bigger about your group and think bigger about the groups in your church. Think exponentially. Add a 0 to whatever groups that you have. There are people in your church who are disconnected from groups. Your groups are almost certainly too big. I don't know what size your group is, but it's probably too big. And thirdly, there are people out there that are in pain who need this community desperately. So there's a lot of people to reach, and we need more leaders. And it doesn't take as much as we think to be a leader. In fact, if I was to ask you, what is the indispensable quality of a leader? No offense, but you'd probably get it wrong. Here's all you need to be a leader. You need followers. The modern word is friends. If you got 2 friends, anyone who's got 2 friends, man, they can lead. Now, of course, we come alongside them and treat them, and there's character. They may need to become a Christian, all kinds of things. But we can think this way. The world is broken and fractured. And they don't know God, and they don't have family. They don't know their purpose.